Okay, we're now live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and I can't think of the other. But welcome everybody. I see some people starting to log in. I am John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director here for CPF. We'll start here in about 4 minutes, but in the meantime, you'll notice some things on your screen. We also wanted to let people know that today is the first day that we're opening up registration for our annual conference. This year, the theme of the conference is opening doors. This year's conference will have two components. One will be education, which will be our opening doors programming for professional training. That'll occur over the course of 4 days. And then we'll have 2 days on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday in June. That will be a feature of sites across the state of California. More than 75 sites, you'll have access to those, including behind the scenes tours, special programming, behind the ropes sort of access to state parks and so forth. So we hope you can look into that. You'll find more information at our website at californiapreservation.org/conference or californiapreservation.org/DOCA for Doors Open California. You can register for either individually or for the whole group of programs together. We hope to see you at this year's program, and we're excited to present the sites across the state of California. We'll start here in about 3 minutes. For today's program, we're encouraging people to start with questions and also end with questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask George or about archival research for Modernist resources, he'd like to hear your questions at the front end so that he can show you through the archives how to reach some of these resources or other questions you may have. So we want to encourage you to use the Q&A box for that. We'll also be monitoring the chat box, and if you're on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the other platforms, we'll keep an eye on those if you have any questions through there. So we want to ask you to ask those questions early, in fact, at the start of the program, and we'll also have time at the end of the program to take your questions. We'll start here in about 2 minutes. Okay, I see a few more people logged in. Just wanted to let you know that we'll start here in about a little over 1 minute. You'll see some things on the screen just to get you introduced to our upcoming programs and other opportunities. Today's program will be an hour in length, but we want to ask you to ask those questions at the start of the program as well. So if you have any questions, we'll give you an opportunity to ask that at the beginning. Please use the Q&A box or the chat box. We have about 50 people logged in and about 160 signed up today, so there might be a lot of questions, so we want to encourage you to ask those early so they can all be addressed. We also are on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch today. So if you have any issues with Zoom, you can jump over to those platforms and look up California Preservation Foundation. We'll start here momentarily.
Hello, John. John just appeared. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our, there he is. Welcome to our webinar today. We're getting a moment to get our production set up. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good. We have so many exciting announcements for everybody. First, welcome to the California Preservation Foundation. I am Chris Madrid French. I'm the Director of Development and Marketing. And John is.
And I am the Field Services Director here at CPF. Before we get started, we just wanted to go over a few quick things. I'll start, and then I'll turn it back to Chris to introduce our speaker. But there's an interesting format today. We wanted to encourage you to ask your questions at the front end. So the Q&A will be at the start. We'll also have some time at the end of the program, but we also wanted to ask that we have you ask those questions first, because George will go over some of these questions as he's showing you things on the website. So if you can ask those questions, please use the Q&A box. We'll keep an eye on that as well. And if you're on the social media platforms, I will be keeping an eye on the chat box there. So please ask your questions. With that being said, I'm going to turn it back to Chris and we'll get started here.
Because I always have something else to say. Anyway, so if you're joining us right now, even if you're on Facebook or Twitch or YouTube or LinkedIn, go ahead and post where you're calling in from. We've had such a variety of people registering for this session today with George Smart, known as Mr. Modernism, honorary AIA now with US Modernist. And I have my little notes here. 19 states, Canada and Australia and District of Columbia. People are joining us today. So go ahead and post in the chat where you're calling in from. So as John mentioned, before we get started with George real quick, we have a couple of announcements. Registration is now open for our annual conference, and that's californiapreservation.org/conference. I put it in the chat window, and John can put that in there again if you'd like to register. Registration is open, and we're introducing all new this year, inaugural year of Doors Open California, which is a whole weekend of open doors where you can visit a range of historic sites across the state for one admission price. So go to californiapreservation.org for more information on that. So, George, you want to go ahead and turn on your camera? I'm going to read his introduction. So almost 15 years ago, one dark and stormy night, George Smart, HAIA, founded a nonprofit that has helped tens of thousands of people discover or rediscover architecture they love, mid-century modernism, and I'm one of those. As executive director of US Modernist, George and his team of woefully underpaid staff and intrepid, dedicated volunteers at USModernist.org and NCModernist.org provide students, architects, realtors, and the architecture-loving public documentation and photos on over 16,000 significant houses nationwide and 5,500 of those in North Carolina. And we're going to be talking about the 30,000 photos and 4 million page architecture magazine library that US Modernist has in its archives. Also tune into US Modernist Radio on iTunes. George has more introduction. He has sold literally dozens of copies of his book, The Knights Templar Chronology. He was awarded the National AIA Institute Honors for Collaborative and Professional Achievement, even though he's not an architect. But before he starts, he asked me to say that while he attended UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, and NC State, he roots for Clemson. So please, everyone, join me in a big welcome for George Smart. Take it away, George. Oh, you're muted. I have to unmute you.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Go Big Orange, Clemson. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Chris and John, for inviting me. And I want to make sure that we get in touch with people who came to the seminar with questions. So if you'll just pop those into the chat box, then Chris or John will announce those as we go along.
We have a few questions too, George. I don't know if you wanted me to mention them now, but
yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and we'll take them. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one from Joanna, and she's asking, are there any advanced search features or filters for searching the magazine archive? It doesn't appear to be particularly nuanced, and results appear organized sort of randomly.
Yes, we are unnuanced and random right now. We're working on some advanced features, but that's as good as it gets at the moment.
Great. And there's more questions coming in. Yeah.
Oh, are there? But why don't we start with George? Why don't you go ahead and just give us the
overview.
idea?
Yes.
Yes, like what
Okay.
is exactly that you have going over there?
All right. Well, I'm going to click in my screen here. All right. So welcome, everybody. I am the executive director of US Modernist, which is a site that a lot of you are familiar with. As Chris said, it's a very extensive website in great detail on about 15,000 houses, about 300 or 400 different architects going back to the mid-century, and also a huge library of architecture magazines. What I'm going to do today is give you a little tour around the site. We're going to explore some of the actual resources. I'm going to give you some tips for searching. We may go searching for some other things as well. And then, of course, we'll have time for your questions as we go along. This all starts out with a particular house that you're seeing here. It's called the Catalano House. It was built in 1954 in Raleigh, North Carolina. At the time, North Carolina State University was the preeminent architecture school between Washington and Atlanta. It was going to be all modernist all the time and had done quite well in that regard. This was an example of a hyperbolic rabeloid roof, really striking, with glass walls covering over a very small living space relatively, about 1,600 feet. When this house was built in 1954, it caused a sensation throughout the entire planet. If you were an architect in Beirut or Japan or Bolivia or Canada or Belgium, you knew about this house. In fact, maybe the only two things you knew about North Carolina as far as houses went would be Biltmore and this house. The Catalano House was designed by Eduardo Catalano. He was an Argentinian professor who was at NC State, very knowledgeable, went on to a great career, lived into his early 90s. When Catalano was at the university in 1954, there was a hurricane called Hurricane Hazel. Hurricane Hazel came through North Carolina, was one of the most destructive hurricanes we've ever had, just ripped through much of the eastern and central part of the state. At the time, Raleigh, which has something like, I don't know, 1.5 million people now, had something on the order of 70, 75,000 people in 1954. So the police force decided that they would go around to all the houses and make sure everyone was okay. I mean, just like you saw on TV with Mayberry RFD. So the police come around, there's Catalano sitting in front of his house, which was undamaged by the storm, by the hurricane. But the police officer comes up to him and says, "Mr. Catalano, I am so sorry what happened to your house," because it looked like it had been hit. This affinity that I and others have for weird looking houses is something that I guess probably a number of you share. You just really like the way they look, the way they feel inside. Sometimes people will have a direct connection to architecture. They're practicing in the field. Others may be related to an architect, as I was. My dad was an architect in the Raleigh area. Some of you just like it and don't really know why. And it's okay. Modernism is one of those things that people rarely recover from. And as they get deeper and deeper into it, it just gets more and more fun. My wife refers to this entire project as a 15-year seizure, and evidently there's no cure. Catalano was very popular, as you might imagine, among the architecture students he taught at NC State, and later in Boston at MIT and as a guest lecturer at other schools. He was famous for his deep understanding of engineering, as well as his quick wit. One of his famous lines from class, and I'll do this in my worst Argentinian accent, he would come and say, "I am now going to teach you the 3 E's of architecture. First, a scale, 2, a space, and 3, a structure." He loved that story. and he would use that to open up his classes. This photo that you're seeing here was taken by Ezra Stoller, I believe in 54, 55 for House and Home magazine. It included the kids of the neighborhood who would come around and play at this house. As you might imagine, both kids and adults alike were just completely fascinated at it and just marveled at this could be a place people would actually live in. Now you'll notice that there are no curtains here on this house. It was on about a 3-acre wooded site, so that was okay. There is one room only in the middle of the house around here, which is the bathroom. Similar in construction to Philip Johnson's glass house in New Canaan, Connecticut, where there's only one room in the middle, and that's the bathroom. The rest was this open space, combination living room, dining room, kitchen with a small counter, bedroom area, and just a tiny bit of storage. And of course, as you can see here in the foreground, this was a sitting area or a sleeping area where you could lie out. And then this great concrete expanse where you could have parties. There were dances out there. Catalano would host lectures for his students, all of that. So this is the website, and you can go to it if you want to and play around with it as we talk. It's USModernist.org. I'm going to take you to a couple of the different sections. So the first section is where we document all the architects and the houses. We have a great team of archivists. Catherine Kramer out in Tucson area, Arizona. We have Carrie Cesarino in the Raleigh area. We have a photographer named Michael Locke, who's photographed probably 5,000 photos on the website, and many others who have volunteered over the years. Our archives for architects are organized by architect. So you can go into any one of these names and click on a photo and see what's up with that particular person's career. We put in as much information as we can just about their residences, not about their commercial projects. Even if a house was unbuilt, but we can find plans or elevations, we try to include that information as well, because very often an unbuilt plan would inform a built plan later on. And as we scroll down here just briefly, you'll see this is quite a long list. They're well over 100. If you have a favorite architect, it's likely that he or she is on this list. And as we get down to the bottom, we start breaking up by subdivisions. So for instance, the case study houses are all here. And they're all mentioned up top alphabetically, but you can see them grouped now by case study, the New York 5, the Harvard 5 in Connecticut, plus Jim Evans, who passed away recently. The most famous architect out in Palm Springs, California. We have Sarasota, we have Long Island, Pacific Northwest, Southwest, and others there as we go along. So I'm going to go back up here. And I'm going to click on somebody that you're probably very familiar with, Marcel Breuer. So Marcel Breuer is credited with being one of the people who brought modernism to America, blended with the ideas that were already here. Most recently, we had a tragedy involving a Breuer house. It's called the Geller House in New York. Somebody bought this house on several acres, beautiful house, really in great shape, told everybody publicly that the house was going to be preserved and it was going to be restored, and then shortly thereafter bulldozed the entire house. And now we've heard it's going to be broken up and sold for a development into smaller lots. This is the real shame of modernism since about 1970. Mid-century modernism got started around the 20s, early 30s roughly. It peaked in the late 50s, early 60s, and by 1970, nobody liked it anymore. There was very little done after that point. For residences, this was done in part because material science really had not kept up with architectural creativity. And so architects were designing houses that some of them really didn't do that well. They had some problems. Roof leakage is one of the most famous examples, probably occurred in about 20% of the houses. But modernism was out. And then when modernism started to be popular again in the mid 90s, late 90s, a number of houses had already been destroyed. And throughout the 2000s and some of the 2010s, this pattern continued. Fortunately now, because of our organization, organizations like Docomomo, Modernism Week, and others throughout the country, we have dramatically slowed the rate of these demolitions. And part of our mission is to increase advocacy and reaching out to owners so that we try to reduce that number even further. So here is our profile of Breuer. We've got a little information bio here. Here we've got, you can actually hear Breuer's voice through interviews by an author named John Peter, who's no longer around. We have audio recordings throughout the site. And then you can start to see some of the early work that we've been able to find images for. This is his early work in Germany. And then as we go through, more Germany. I know I'm going fast here, but I'm getting you to some houses that are a little more photogenic. This is mostly furniture. So here is a house here in Wiesbaden. Here's one in Zurich. And this goes all the way through the end of his career. Breuer will shift to the UK for a couple of years and do a few houses. There's one in Sussex. And here we go, 1938, the Haggerty House in Cohasset, Massachusetts. Still there, been restored, really nice, beautiful example of Breuer designs and architecture. And then we can spin all the way down here to the bottom and look at some of his last projects. Beautiful. This was a house done in '84, a couple of years after Breuer passed away, but the design is attributed to him and was carried out with the firm by Herbert Beckhardt, his partner. And here's a shot of a house in Bedford. Breuer died during the design and build. We've got a couple of houses throughout the site where we know what it looked like, but we're not really sure if it was built or not. So a lot of the people who are volunteers will comb through our entries and do independent research and submit that to us. And that's one of the ways that we update the site. So that's a great profile there of Breuer. And then we'll go back and I'll show you one. It's a little more current.
George, it's me. You got to
Yes.
get us to the archive.
The magazine archive?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We have questions. We have loads of questions. And what we want to do is be able to show people how to get in the archive. Now, I know that we have a lot of people from Ohio on this particular webinar. Maybe we could start with something like that.
Sure. Before I go there, just let me show you, we have a number of architects that are still around with us. Peter Bolin, for instance, a great guy. I've had a number of conversations with him. His project started in 1961, about 61 years ago. And these are all his beautiful pieces of work. And you can find those in our architects gallery as well. All right, so let's go back to our architecture magazine library. I'll tell you how this started. As with several things in our organization, this started with a phone call. I got a call from a realtor in Charlotte in 2013, 9 years ago, who said, "Hey, George, I hear you're the architecture guy. I've got a basement with 20 cases full of old architecture magazines, dusty. Some of them I think are wet. Do you want them?" And we weren't collecting anything at that point. And I thought, well, sure. So he says, well, if you want them, you've got to get down here in 48 hours. And this was a place that was about 150 miles away. So I got on Craigslist and hired one of those guys that'll drive a truck anywhere. He went down there, picked up the 20 boxes, brought them back to my garage. We then went on eBay and bought a whole bunch of old, used, cheap scanners. We took the magazines to the local FedEx office and sheared off the edge of the spine so that the magazines could be sheet feedable. And then we went through each magazine, pulling out all the subscription cards and the AOL CDs from the 1990s and weird cardstock and perfume samples and all those things that come in magazines. Scanned them all and put them online. And instantly they were a hit. And this has just expanded. That was an initial load of maybe 300,000 or 400,000 pages back in 2013. Now we're over 4 million. We're adding at least about 1,000 pages a day, sometimes more on average. So you can go to this page by accessing USModernistorg/library. And you can go down here and start to see some of the titles. So the first section are national magazines that more or less are still around. We start with Architectural Record, the big one that started in the 1890s. We have almost all the magazines that ever came out. You can look through here and you can see where the obvious gaps are, like between 1928 or so and 1933, we're missing quite a few issues. You can go into one of these. I'm going to pick December 37. And very quickly it will load. And there's Architecture Record. And you can see images and you can see the text. And then if you want to go over here to the side and you want to download that, you can, or you can print it. It's very versatile. So we'll go back here. You can see this goes all the way down to about 2016. With most of
oh, sorry to interrupt you. I had a question related to this. So is there a subject index for the archive, or do you have tell people to maybe go to site Google where they want to find and then come back to your site?
Right. So I'll show how the search function works in just a second, because that accesses everything.
Okay, cool.
All right. So we'll go back here. You can pick any one of these different magazines. Some are a brand new, like here's a brand new modernist magazine called Ocean Modern. It's got one issue. The editors contacted us. They wanted to be involved in this. And here it is. Beautiful new magazine about modern houses on the coast.
Hey, George. There was a question related to these PDFs. Are the PDFs themselves searchable?
Yes, they are. They sure are. So once you download them, you can search within them all you want. Now, in our search box, what this will do is, let's say we want to find information on the Chewy house, which is a house in LA by Richard Neutra. We can type that in and we can start to find instances from our site where this shows up. So it will show up under Gregory Ains' profile because his second wife married Robert Chewy and Neutra designed their house, so they're connected that way. Under Neutra's own, under past newsletters where we featured the house. Here's where magazines is the Architecture for Sale magazine from back. And these are all the different places where you can find that particular set of information. Most of you know that you can get a search to be much more specific if you put it in quotes like that. Because if you just put in Richard Neutra by itself, it's going to give you all the instances of both the word Richard or the word Neutra. And that's a lot of results. So if you put something like that in quotes, you're just searching for the phrase. All right, let's go back to our couple of resources in here I want to point out that you may not have seen before. this is a publication called the Architect's Newspaper, which you can subscribe to. It's a really wonderful publication that tells you what's going on right now in great architecture all around the US and the world. If you want to know what buildings are going up or what's going to be on the horizon for the next couple of years, this is where you would go. And Bill Minking, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, was a great contributor to our organization in general and also in helping provide all these resources. There's a second thing that I think is even more fun, and this is called the Architectural Index. So I know some of you may not remember a time before Google, but there was a time before Google. And back then, Irv Bell put together a publication called the Architectural Index, which started in 1952. And what Irv would do is he would subscribe to all the magazines of the time. He would subscribe to Architectural Record and Architectural Forum and Arts and Architecture, and all of them. And then at the end of the year, he would go through and index each article in each magazine, and he would print a book that would be a comprehensive resource that an architecture firm could buy to see all its press clippings. So we can load up one of these. Here's the index for 52. Now, this is just what Google does for you today when you start going on searches. As you can see, these are the 6 periodicals that he indexed at that time, and he expanded that later. These are all the abbreviations he used. And he cross-referenced this by location and type of project. Like here's all the projects involving Alabama in 1952 in the major media. So if you know when the building that you're researching was either built or maybe just the year right after that, you can dive into these architectural indexes, and it's just a gold mine of information. You can also look up things by the architect or designer. There's all Breuer's projects that got pressed that year. And this went on until around 2008, when Irv basically lost the battle with Google. You can't compete with a giant corporation making instant access to everything. But this was really one of the most valuable publications of its day. And it's one of the ones that I really like the most. Another one I'll point out here is Progressive Architect, formerly called Pencil Points. We have every single one of these, I believe, going back to 1920. Every year, every issue. You can see them all there. Pencil Points and Progressive Architecture were a little more edgy, a little more avant-garde than Architecture Record was at the time. The Progressive Architecture Awards, which was an awards program started by the magazine, still exists. They've traded hands a couple times. I think we just went through the 64th or 69th iteration of the Progressive Architecture Awards. And because there was no internet again during a lot of this time, people really fought to get their projects featured in the magazines. It was quite an honor to get there. All right, let's go down here to the state publications, and then we'll stop and pause for a few questions.
Yeah,
so I know we have a lot of people from Ohio here. Let's go to Ohio. So here are all the magazines of AIA Ohio, and we've got theirs back quite a ways into the 40s. We can click on one of these, and there it is. Ohio Architect, April 1940. In unity, there is strength. We got all these state publications through our partnership with AIA National. Last summer, they literally sent me a truck full of magazines, 700,000 pages of magazines from all the states and cities that we scanned over the course of last summer and are now putting them up as we make contact with the different AIA chapters. So when you go back to this main page, you can see all these different locations that you can access here. You just click on one, and there it is. We often have directories if a state published an architecture directory, so that's great for historical research. And then we have some from Arcade, which is a magazine of the Pacific Northwest. and then also the Southern California chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians. All right, Chris, what questions do we have?
So many, George. Well, first, I want to just thank you and your team for putting this together. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat about, I can't even believe how much information is here. So a lot of the questions have to do with indexing. So Bridget, hey Bridget, haven't seen you for a while. Is the Avery Index available on this site? Do you have any copies of that, old days? From a million years ago, we used to use the Avery Index to find our architecture.
No, we don't have
articles.
that yet. If there were printed copies of it, we'd love to get it. And then
I
we
do
can work
believe they
something
were
out with
printed. I
yeah.
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
we can we also, besides documents, we can digitize most anything. Today, I got a VHS tape of a talk that was given in the early 2000s that we're going to be digitizing. We've digitized cassettes, Super 8, 8-track, you name it. We try to get these things and make them available.
there, someone asked, is Architectural Digest is not on the list. Is that because it's still active and publishing?
It's not because it's active. We have a lot of active publications like Record, for instance.
Oh, right.
It's because Architecture Digest, unfortunately for the public, I guess good for them, put all their archives behind a paywall. So it costs something like $20, $30 a month to access their archives. And you can only pull them up by article. You can't pull up a whole issue. We hope one day to persuade them to let us add Architecture Digest to this library.
Well, let's lobby. Raymond is wondering if you have those any videos up on your site already and where those might be located.
Sure. So we can go up here. We have under each of the architects, there are some videos on each one. Let's pull up Neutra here and I'll show you some there. So here's Neutra's page. And we've been experimenting. We have a beta test on a couple of pages, including this one, of a new GIS system. So for Neutra, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Lautner, we have geomapped all their houses around the world. So here you can see all of Neutra's houses. We can zero in on one, and you can see a small thumbnail. You can see the address. You can click through to the address if you want to know where it is. Say that you're in Cincinnati for the weekend. And let's
That's the usual picture of a Neutra house. They're always behind the bushes.
Yes, they're always in the woods. You can access the general page back on Neutra there. And then you can zoom in. Let's say we want to zoom in here. There's a lot here in the Philadelphia area. So you can zoom in and you can find exactly where the houses are. So we have this for those three architects, Neutra, Wright, and Lautner. And then down here further, you can see where some of the videos are.
Oh, wow,
so you can click on these particular ones. We have a interview in German on Austrian TV of Neutra, a couple of those there. And then Raymond Neutra was instrumental in helping us put a book online, one of Richard Neutra's early books. You have the complete PDF right here you can download and read.
Wonderful. Thank you, Raymond, for donating that. Let me get to some more questions. Are you including international magazines such as Arbiter, GA Houses, etc.?
Well, I compare my job sometimes to being the captain of a fishing trawler that is just moving along the universe collecting stuff. We have collected a few GA Houses, which is a very expensive, very well done Japanese architecture magazine. We don't have the rights to put that online yet. And at the present time, we're just focusing on US magazines. We want to get all of those collected first, make sure that's very sound before we go further afield.
Okay. If somebody has a correction that they'd like to send you, how should they send you information? Like, where do people contact you, George?
So at the bottom of every page, there's my email address and phone number. I am the world's easiest person to reach. And I love to wake up in the morning and go to the computer, and there'll be people who have sent in additions or corrections. And that's how I like to start my day.
John just put your information in the chat. Thank you, John. And we're going to just keep rolling through these questions. There's so many in here, George. Do you know if anyone has tried to find and digitize the advanced bibliographies that were developed on some of American modernist architects?
I do not. We'd love to do it, but we haven't gotten those in the shrimp trawler yet.
I love your what's the analogies. Okay, so here's one from Francesca. If a mid-century property's parking garage shares the features of the main building, was designed by the same architects, and was completed the same year, would you consider the parking garage a contributor to the historically significant property?
Well, I'm not so much knowledgeable about commercial properties, as our site is mostly tracking houses. I mean, my initial answer would be, given all those conditions you just stated, probably yes. But when you get into commercial properties, hospitals, offices, schools, things like that, it's really a whole different ballgame.
I would agree. I think there's an argument to be made if you do have a structure that shows all of the same character defining features of another property and designed by a significant architect, that you can make that argument. And I saw that Bridget also agrees. So Francesca, get out there and declare that historic. Chuck had a couple of questions. This is one. Are you including more recent post-60s architecture that might fall into the modern style? Are you going all the way up into brutalist, George? Where are you at?
Yes, we're going all the way up into houses that were done last year. I mean, if a house is modernist, we're trying to include it if we can. We took the strategy of doing it by architect rather than by geography, which has actually been very, very helpful and a little bit easier, because we can take an architect and dive deep into their work for a couple of months, get as much as we can, and then move on to the next one.
Okay, and let's see. I just saw one here. Okay, talk to us about this, about how you get the permission to put all these magazines and things. What is the process? And also, while you're doing that, if I find a whole bunch of magazines in my closet, what should I do with them, George?
Those are two excellent questions. So getting the magazines and scanning them is the easy part. We have to have conversations with the rights owners of the magazines. And sometimes they'll say yes in 5 minutes. And sometimes it will take a year or 2 years or 3 years to get everything hammered out. But ultimately, the publishers see the value of being associated with this giant mass of information and want it to be accessible to the public. They also like the fact that A, it doesn't cost them anything, and B, they don't have to do any work. They really love those two factors. Now, if you, Chris, or anybody else has magazines, let me show you what we need. So on the website, at the URL USModernistorg/needed, NEEDED, these are all the magazine issues that we're missing. So if you have any of these in your closet or basement or storage unit, or you know where they are somewhere, or if you're a library that wants to free up some shelf space and wants to deaccession, but has felt guilty about throwing them away, we are your answer. So we pay for shipping, or we will reimburse your institution to ship the magazines to us, and we will take it from there. So these are all the specific issues and years that we need for the main magazines. If you have AIA magazines from here, we don't have a needed section for that. You just have to look at the page here, like with Kansas City, and see that we're missing some information here for some of the 70s and things like that. So you just have to compare it against the page. That's how it's done.
I'm so excited about this. So I have another question. As a historian and a researcher, I'll occasionally, helping a family document a house or something like that. And they'll have drawings. It might be a family member or even somebody who just bought the house, and they have drawings, and they don't ever know where to put these original drawings. Do you have any capacity for scanning drawings, or is that in the plan as part of the architects list that you have?
So what we found out early on is that drawings don't scan well into a website.
Mm.
And since most people are not trained to read the drawings, it's not particularly useful for us to collect them.
Mhm.
So what we do all the time is sometimes there's a useful elevation in the plans that might show how a house looks, and we'll just take a snapshot of that. But generally, we are connecting people with their local schools of architecture or architecture libraries, where these plans can be put in appropriate climate controlled storage where they can last forever. The key thing is getting them out of the attic, getting them out of the storage unit.
I agree, or the back of the closet. There's so many occasions, but that's happened at, I know University of Florida has a huge architecture archive. Obviously, UCLA, Getty have archival information. Sometimes it's just hard to get it into the archive, like you're talking about. Okay, so many more questions, George. What do you do with the originals? What do you do with the originals when you're done scanning?
So it really depends on the donor. Most of the donors don't want them back. And we have tried to give them away to schools and universities, and nobody wants to take them. So typically we just recycle them. For the most part, these magazines are not rare in the sense that they're sitting in basements and bookshelves and attics and libraries all over the country. So losing a set is not the end of the world. Occasionally, donors want them back. And so, for instance, AIA National wanted all their 700,000 pages back this summer. So what we do is once we scan them, we shrink wrap them, put them back in boxes, and they go off to some storage facility, wherever the Ark of the Covenant is also stored.
I love that. Okay, so different. Oh, Nelson, who is a friend of ours in Atlanta. Hey, Nelson.
Hey,
Says
Nelson.
he says different universities with architectural schools have publications that would be a great addition to the overall content of your site, such as the Oklahoma. And have you talked to, I guess there'd be architectural school publications?
We haven't talked to the architectural school publications so much because most of the time their content was mirrored by their state or city AIA publications. So we're capturing a lot of it in the publications that we already have. Also, universities and schools are very good about keeping their own magazines, so we don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true. They have you're right. They have an archive. I'd like to mention that George is also took one of my old websites and archived it. So I started mission66.com, studying the National Park Service. Oh, he's going to find it somewhere. I'm studying National Park Service visitor centers from 1956 to 1966. I kept the site active for about 20 years. And the day after I took it down, George calls me up on the phone and says, "Where's your website? I want to archive it." So thank you for doing that, George. That was an amazing, spot on coincidence.
We have all her content right here saved forever.
And I hand coded this site in the early 90s or the mid 90s. It was like 96, hand coded it before we had all these fun things that we could use now. All right, so next question is from Josh. And are there any filters in the search function? So I think people are just wondering, George, how do you really find something in this giant archive? Do you have any advice on which terms work best when trying to dig up info on a specific building, such as architect, address, name, owner, etc.?
Sure. In general, as most of you know, the more specific a search you get, the more likely you are to find what you're looking for. A couple of tips I can give you. So if you're looking for, let's say 1234 Main Street. And you type it in like that. But what that means is anytime there's an entry where street is abbreviated, you may not pick up that particular listing. So you're going to miss that. So what you want to do is just put the essential phrase in quotes. Leave out anything that can be interpreted a different way, like the street name. And then you can put in a city, like so. And here, you could put in Charlotte, North Carolina in quotes. So really learning how to use the quotes, you can get quite good at this. And North Carolina could also be done as NC, right? So you might have to test it both ways. And then also, you can also get lucky if you're chasing a building by a famous architect, putting the name, the address like that, and then something like this. And you can see many references will have the architect's last name and then the street address in it. If you do just the architect and a city, you might hit something, but only if that architect maybe did one thing in that one city. So again, we are working on making the search function more robust, but this is what we have for now.
It's definitely a good start. So someone is asking if you want any old issues of architectural design magazines, but you've said that they already have a lock on the archive.
Well, no, to answer that, we're still collecting it.
Oh, you still collect them? Oh, okay.
We still collect, we just don't have the permission yet. So if we go back here to this, you can see here's Architectural Digest.
Oh, okay.
And here are the different issues that we are missing. So if the person who wrote this has some of those issues, please let us know.
Okay, great. Well, there you go, Joe. If you have issues of Architectural Digest that fit within that, I think that's great. You're collecting it, George, no matter what. So let me go to the next one. Oh, Bridget is wondering if you could somehow like let people know when you're disposing of your original copies, because apparently they'd be very popular with this particular group of people. But I could see why that would be a problem, George. You end up with like with a whole warehouse of magazines.
Well, we do. And also remember, we're cutting the spines off of these, so they're all loose pages. And that's another reason why people typically don't want them at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have Raymond Neutra. Hello, Raymond. I posted in the chat, Raymond had mentioned that Neutra.org is also building a gallery of Richard and Dion Neutra and Neutra and Alexander commercial and civic and multiple housing project
that's
properties.
Great. Yes.
So that would be useful. And then Raymond had asked, do you have to search within one journal, or can you search for all? Yeah, you can search all the journals at the same time.
All the journals at one time, yes.
So if you typed in, so let's take the VDL house, the Vanderloo, talk about spelling errors, right? So if you were searching for that in your archive, what might you find, just as an example? Would you look up Silver Lake too, or?
Well, VDL house is pretty unique as a descriptor. Mm-hmm. So we might add that, and let's see what comes up. So about 59 results in our archives, as you can see here.
How can you tell if it's in the, oh, there's my Save Neutra's building at Gettysburg. That's Recyclorama. Oh gosh, I'm in your archive.
That's right, you're in there, Chris. Of course you're in there.
Isn't that fun? How do I know if it's a magazine? Like if there's a VDL in a magazine, how would I be able to determine that from the
sometimes it will tell you by what the title phrase is here. Mm-hmm. But otherwise you just have to click on it and look into it. Like here, this is the Society of Architectural Historians from 2011. So if we click on this, it will say something about the VDL house in that newsletter.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. Someone's recommending different ways to search through this. This is really great, George. So what are your plans for the future? And if anyone has any more questions, now is your time to post them. We've got about 10 more minutes, and we're going to close it out. So what are your plans for the future, George? What do you aspire to with this archive?
So right now we have about 4 million pages. If we add everything we want to add for the US, we'll top out at about 5 million. We're going to have a push over the next couple of years. We're looking to get donors to help us hire a full-time archivist. We're also going to go out in the open market and purchase the magazines that we don't have from used magazine vendors and just be able to have complete runs of all the magazines that we have. So we want to be able to finish out this library. That's really one of our most important priorities. Secondly, with the addition of the archivist, we'll be able to go into, here's one I'll show you. Al Beadle, very well-known architect in the Phoenix area, but he practiced all over the country. There are a number of houses for which we have a little bit of information but no photo. And then a number of houses for which we have a photo but no information. So part of our goal in the next couple of years is to have our archivist and the volunteers that will work for her to help flesh all this out and find the missing pieces. I will warn you, if you're thinking about doing this and helping us out, it is highly, highly addictive. Once you start, you will not want to stop.
So someone like me, I have a lot of photographs from a long time ago. And if I wanted to donate some to you and say, here's a great picture I took of a building that's actually been demolished at this point, usually.
Yeah.
So we could just contact you at the bottom of your website and just say,
Right.
See if you needed something like that.
Right. What we encourage people to do is, these days, most email programs can send, 10, 12 photos, no problem. Or you can send using something like WeTransfer or MyAirBridge, or you can transfer like up to 20 gig of photos in one swoop, in one email. It's better to do it that way than to send it by something like Dropbox.
Dropbox keeps pinching me for more space. Which I was going to ask you, George, what are your servers at? Where do you store all of this? You must have like a huge electric bill.
Well, initially, and initially meaning like for the first 8 years, our web cost was $14.95 a month because we were doing it on an ancient Yahoo server that eventually we just outgrew. And then we moved to Germany, where we kept data over there with a company that has been great. It was lightning fast getting data back and forth to Germany. And about 2 or 3 years ago, they opened up a new subsidiary in Kansas. So now our data is thriving beneath the waving wheat on the plains of Kansas.
That's wonderful. It's so appropriate. So before we start closing out, you had mentioned that, why don't you tell us a little bit about US Modernist, and you're starting your in-person tours again, is that right?
Yes. One of the ways that the nonprofit functions and thrives is through people coming on our tours. So I'll pull up an example here. We take people every year to Falling Water in Mill Run, Pennsylvania. This is a weekend tour where they get to see a couple of Frank Lloyd Wright houses. We take them to the Andy Warhol Museum. We take them to a wonderful place called Polymath Park, which is like an amusement park full of modernist houses for people to see. And these tours are all modernism all the time. We take people to Palm Springs every February for a wonderful Modernism Week tour. We'll be taking people to Europe again. We had to stop that for the pandemic, but probably by the end of this year, early 23, our European tours will be going again. And when you go with us to Europe, it is just modernist architecture. So if you want to go see the Eiffel Tower, you got to do that on your own time. We're going to take you to the newest and the most classic modernist buildings in an area.
Love that. Stick to the brand. So we have a couple more questions. Can you talk about your equipment and your digitizing? You say you take the spine off the magazines. Do you have a feed, and you feed these things through, or?
Yes. So in my office around, I have, I think, 3 scanners within sight. We have a very common one you could buy at Office Depot. We have a large format scanner, which is 11 inches across. So we can do oversized publications. I think it'll take like up to 11 by 30. And that's about as big as we go and as big as magazines go, really. But we can't process that all here in-house. We have a vendor, also a very wonderful donor, essentially, that will scan these things for us. And he's scanned like 3.5 million pages so far. So he'll come pick all the magazines up, take them to his place, run them through the machine, and then send me back the PDFs.
Good system. I'm going to do one more question here from Nelson, and then we're going to close out. So Nelson says, how do you select the architects who are added to the list? He has some that he wants that we should have added, including Ken Kellogg. Did you see Alan Hess's presentation?
Yes.
And that was about Ken Kellogg, wasn't it? And then so he says Robert Broward, Robert Green, Jim Fox. I'm sure you get these questions a lot. You know, like I have Florida, I could say Neil Schweitzer, who worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, might be somebody on there. So how do you get a new architect added to your architects list?
So we started with the architects that were really of national reputation and had worked across large areas of the U.S., like Frank Lloyd Wright, for instance. And we've been working our way through to those that are more regional in nature. So we have some from, as I showed you earlier, from the New York area, from the Sarasota area. Anybody can suggest new ones anytime. We also have a program that I can show people how to build their own archive. I can show them how to do it in our format. They can work on it independently and send it to us. So I'll give you an example of that real quick. I can spell that correctly. There we go. So this is a fellow named William Whiffler. And you may not have heard of William Whiffler, but he was an architect that did some pretty nice buildings. And someone in his family contacted me and wanted us to do an archive. And we didn't really have the capacity at that time to take on yet another person. So I showed them how our format works. They put it together in a Word document, sent it all to me, and in about 5 minutes, it was uploaded. So we can do it that way as well if people are willing to put in some time assembling the information.
Incredible, George. I just can't believe how much information you have up there. And Chuck says you should consider doing a New York tour, Fire Island and Long Island, maybe with our friend Christopher Rollins up there. So.
Well, funny you should say that, because we are planning that exact itinerary.
What?
In August. It has not been announced yet because we're still working on specific sites to visit. But the tentative plan is to have a Hamptons and Fire Island tour in the middle of August.
Excellent. Well, that's wonderful. So I'm sure people can find all these updates at your website.
The best way is to get on the newsletter.
Oh, the newsletter.
Which is here. Okay. You can go on the website, put in your information. Our newsletter comes out every Monday morning, and it's full of modernist news, and then all the events that we do are announced there.
Wonderful. Well, George, Catherine says she wanted to say hi.
Hi, Catherine. Catherine is one of our best researchers, have been with us now 10 or 12 years. She's responsible for many thousands of houses on the site being researched.
Well, I really appreciate, all of us here appreciate all of your dedication, George, over the decades, because I met you probably 20 years ago. And Chuck says, how can we send money to your group to support your efforts?
You can go on the website up at the top where it will say more info. Hang on a second, let me move this around. More info, and then
I see it on mine. It's right next door, donate.
There's a donate button right there.
Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, and everyone's clapping and congratulating you. Thank you so much, George, for your time.
Well, thank you. Chris is a tireless advocate for modernism. She inspired me to stay with this crazy thing. So I appreciate you, Christine.
Thank you. We appreciate you too, George. I'm going to take over the screen share because I want to, as we close out, I just like to show everybody that we are, I hope I have the right screen. We are opening registration for our annual conference. It's opening doors. Registration is now open. CaliforniaPreservation.org. We have so many interesting and fun things coming up in June. We have our online educational sessions, which we decided online is the best because we have so many people from around the country and around the world who are interested in these preservation topics. But in addition to the online conference, we have, for the very first time, Doors Open California, which is 2 days of tours that John and our big team are helping to set up all across California. It's the largest statewide celebration of historic places. We are very bold and leaning into this. For only $20 for a ticket, you have access to all of these sites, and it's going to be just a great celebration this year. So I want to encourage everybody to join CPF or become a member, because we value our members so much and we couldn't do it without you. So it's californiapreservation.org. So to close out, George, thank you very much. This has been
You are
wonderful to
welcome.
see you.
Yes.
And I know John always has the last word. He keeps popping in and out of the screen.
Well, I saw on your site, George, that it looks like you may also be accepting Bitcoin. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
Oh,
We've been
okay.
in cyber currency for years now.
Great. So if you have a few extra Bitcoin lying around, I'm sure George would be happy to accept them. So thank you again. And I also wanted to remind people, as Chris has, about our annual conference this year. Today's the opening of our registration, so we hope to see you there. And also, if you go to californiapreservation.org/e, you can let us know how George did today, and we'll share that information with him, and then we'll look forward to seeing you at our next program. Thank you all for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you all.
George.